Hello viewers, welcome back to another episode of our Liberating Minds podcast. I'm your host Makanga, very glad to be here today. With us is
Sabukwe Shakura with the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Welcome to this episode, comrade.
However, you know I'm not a stranger to this platform, and it's always great to be here with you all.
Yes, we're glad to have you. So today we are going to discuss about Amílcar Cabral. On the 12th of September this year, we shall mark 100 years since the birth of Amílcar Cabral. Amílcar Cabral is significant in our history as African people, but is also significant in our analysis of our global situation as well as our local situation as we continue with our quest for liberation. So we're going to have this episode in commemoration of Amílcar Cabral, but also to ask ourselves certain questions as regard the significance of Amílcar Cabral. With us is Soboko Shakura, who will help us to answer some of these important questions. So, Comrade Soboko, who is Amílcar Cabral and why is he significant?
That question could be answered for all night. We could talk about the significance of his contributions. But I want to talk, maybe first start with my own experiences with Amílcar Cabral's thought and its far-reaching influences on the world. I was born on January 20th. January 20th, 1973 was when Cabral was assassinated. Okay. I didn't know who Cabral was. And of course, I was a baby. So in 1957. But Cabral's first real conscious influence on me was in 1973. I was a high school student, and we were getting conscious about the liberation struggles in Africa. And at the time, on the college campuses, there were struggles against Portuguese colonialism. The college students were organizing boycotts against Portuguese goods, and we participated in those boycotts, and we participated in all of the programming, marches, and everything against the Portuguese. Again, at this point, I didn't understand who Cabral was. I only understood that we were fighting against Portuguese colonialism, and that was one of my conscious understandings. Later, I would find out about Cabral through my interaction with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I became very conscious of the contributions that Cabral had made to the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Because Cabral, at the time, when the APRP was being born in 1968, was coming back and forth from Guinea-Bissau to Guinea-Conakry, where their base was. Again, they had a safe space in Guinea-Conakry. At that time also, Kwame Nkrumah was in Guinea-Conakry. After he was overthrown by the CIA, Kwame Nkrumah was given co-presidency in Guinea-Conakry with Sékou Touré, and Nkrumah being the only person to be president of two African states. But the importance is that Nkrumah at the time was rewriting the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. The handbook had been started in Ghana before he was overthrown. His enemies, the CIA, seized and destroyed the book, but he continued to put this book together. The significance of this book is this book was a piece of work trying to bring the political parties and the political revolutionary organizations, national liberation struggles together under one political party. And to put forth strategies not only on the question of political leadership, but how to conduct armed struggle. who defining how these forces and defining all the forces in the field and how they should come together. The significance of this is that Cabral's presence in Guinea gave Nkrumah's book even more life because he was involved in the armed struggle. He had already started Concept, the organization that brought together the liberation forces in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. This experience of uniting armed struggle, putting together a liberation force over a geographical space that was larger than just one state in Africa, he could add and help Nkrumah better define this work in the book, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. So when we think about this, his contributions went far beyond the place of just his struggle and the struggle of the people in Guinea-Bissau. It was on a Pan-African scale, and then we know it was also on an international scale. Because Cabral, when he participated in Tricontinental Conference, the conference that took place in the early 60s, and brought together forces from Africa, Asia, and Latin America to talk about how they can coordinate their struggles. It's there that he made one of probably the most significant speech at the conference, when he talked about that the struggle, the people's struggle, could not just be defined in terms of a discussion of what you're against and just throwing insults at the enemy. He said one of the biggest weaknesses in our struggle for national liberation is ideology, clear direction. What are we fighting for? Because you can't win. You can't win a revolutionary struggle unless you are clear on where you're going. He said that there's been many revolutions or revolutionary attempts that have failed. But he said there has never been a revolutionary attempt that has succeeded without revolutionary ideology. So it became very clear. It became very clear that his thought processes, his revolutionary ideas impacted not only revolution, like I said, in Guinea-Bissau and the African continent, but in the global sense. So I think that it's hard to underestimate how much that he gave to this struggle in his short life. Because you said he was born in 1924 and he died in 1973. He was assassinated. But we know that he not only left us the lore around his revolutionary contributions, but he also wrote down in many speeches, and he has books we can read, we can study him. When we look at the book that was consolidated called Africa in Unity, you can see many of his speeches not only on the level of theory, but you can also read his speeches on actual practice in the revolutionary process. You can look at the questions of how he dealt with understanding things like speeches he wrote to the enemy, explaining to the enemy why they shouldn't be fighting, why they shouldn't be giving their lives for imperialism, talking about things like, even back then, like NATO and the role of NATO, and that they were, and making it clear that they were not only fighting the Portuguese colonialism, that they were fighting NATO, because Portugal on its own probably could not have even held Guinea-Bissau for so long. NATO was the same North Atlantic Treaty Organization that is trying to destroy Russia behind Ukraine. They were behind the Portuguese, the colonialists. They were helping them, transporting their troops. They were helping them with military intelligence, with military hardware. They were helping them to keep this colony in check, to hold on to the colony, although they were unsuccessful. And I think that's the thing that we have to understand, that the idea of something like these forces, we have to understand the convergence of these forces. And that goes back to what he really contributed. He contributed an understanding of imperialism that was not just the struggles that we were fighting against in national liberation, the force like Portugal or France or whatever. They were backed by bigger forces, the forces of imperialism across the world, like the tool NATO.
Yeah. You've talked about his contributions.
Yes.
You've talked about some of the books that he wrote. You've talked about some of the analysis that he made, not only as regards the struggle that was going on in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, but also in the world at large, against NATO, against imperialism. So what are some of these ideas that you think stand out and that you think are relevant in guiding our struggle today?
Well, I think I mentioned the first one. We have to have revolutionary ideology. Without revolutionary ideology, then you can't win. He also was very clear on the question of scientific socialism and struggling for the question of Pan-Africanism and struggling to understand your own conditions. He was clear that he was not just trying to transfer ideologies from another place and strategies and tactics from another place. He was clear that it's only by understanding your relationship to others, but also understanding your particular conditions in this place that you're struggling. He was saying where some of his fighters, some of his people were sent to other places to train in guerrilla warfare. And then they come back. And some of the training that they were receiving wasn't useful in Guinea-Bissau because the terrain was different in Guinea-Bissau. There were no trains in Guinea-Bissau. You know, you're learning how to blow up a train when there's no train. Or you're learning how to do warfare from the hills and there's no hills. So you have to know your conditions. And he taught us, and he said one of the clear things about economics and furthering on the understanding that people like Marx and Mao had written on economics. He said that class struggle was not the only aspect of history. In other words, you know, when we read Marx, he emphasizes that class struggle is how we understand history, not just by individuals, which is a very important point. You know, we have to understand the classes that are in tension. So we have to know that in a class society, like a feudal society, that is a struggle between the landlords, the lords, the kings, and the serfs. We have to understand that in the economic system of slavery, there's the struggle between the slave masters and the slaves or the enslaved. We have to understand that these things to understand the nature of the struggle, which is much more important than us understanding just individuals in the struggle. So history is not really the history of one great person, but is the history of this class struggle. But what Cabral did is to clarify this even further. He said if indeed it was only a class struggle, then we would be saying that there's no history in humanity, in society, in Africa before classes become prevalent. So he went on to explain to people the struggle is around the questions of the means of production and who controls those means of production. So it's the productive forces that are defining history. The productive forces, which they do come to a point of class struggle. And he went on to say that if you don't understand that, then you can never have communism, because we said that communism is going to be a classless society. And we know that communalism was a classless society. But there was history during communalism, and there'll be history during communism. History will not disappear. So he clarified that point and furthered the people's understanding of these revolutionary ideas.
You've talked about his understanding that there can be no successful revolution without revolutionary ideas. And of course, we see that he was part of an organization that was guided by revolutionary ideology. Having said that and having understood that, what would you say is his argument for organization? Why do you think it's important, according to what we've seen about him and what he was saying, why do you think it's important for people to be organized and for people to belong to organizations if they want to achieve any meaningful change in the society?
Yeah, I think from his experience, one, he came to be very clear on the need for organization and the need for how you can move in a revolutionary fashion, because he understood that the forces that he was dealing with were organized. We talked about the layers of their organization. We were saying on the level of the Portuguese, on the level of NATO, on the level of imperialism as a world force, socially and economically. There's no way an unorganized force, he saw, could defeat these forces. I mean, the organization had to move through stages. I mean, at first, they attempted a peaceful transition in the society, but they were mowed down, shot and killed. At some point, they had to come to build some kind of organizational methodology that could take on the enemy. And they had to be organized. It could not be disorganized. I mean, if it was this, if you try to take on a military force that's organized without organization, especially, that's the only thing that you can do. You can out-organize them. You cannot beat them straight on when they have all of the military hardware. He also understood the people, the masses, were also being affected by the state of war. So they had to provide and work with organizing the masses, organizing when a liberated space, organizing healthcare, continued education, the things that people had to have for everyday life. You cannot do that if you're not an organized force. So it's critical that we understand, again, like a revolution cannot be successful without a revolutionary ideology, it can't not be successful without an organized force, an organization. In fact, he emphasized that our goal is not just to build another organization, but a party, a political party. He understands that in a political party, you can develop monolithic thought, meaning a set of ideas that keep you all together and take you to the next stage of your struggle. Because when he defined liberation, he was clear, the party was clear, that you can't be liberated until you liberated your means of production, your resources, the things that you build your economy around. Because that's one of the errors of many of the national liberation forces on the continent. And it's also where we have not reached full liberation on the continent. I mean, it's because we have not liberated our land and resources. So we're selling raw resources. We're allowing our land to be occupied in many of the settler places in Africa. So we don't have the resources to continue production. And this is what colonization and imperialism does when it gets to a place. It destroys your ability to clothe yourself, to raise your food, all the things that every society does before imperialism comes here. They make us think that we were somehow dependent. When the Europeans came to Africa, Africa didn't need anything that the Europeans were offering. They didn't need jewelry. They didn't need things from outside. Africa was already producing its own iron, turning iron ore into iron, taking gold out of the ground and utilizing it, growing cotton and making clothes, all the things that make a society. And he was clear that until you get back to that productive ways, you will constantly be dependent on an oppressor. And this is what he was clear on, and this is what he understood organization had to be. You had to be organized to take your every step to every level, or you'll be continually oppressed. So he was clear that you cannot win this fight without organization. Maybe I've over-talked on that one, but yes.
Yes. It's an overemphasis on what's important. Of course, we know that definitely you have to be organized, you have to belong to an organization in order to defeat the enemy, because that's what the enemy is. The enemy is organized, and therefore we must out-organize them. Yes. So finally, looking at the local situation here in Kenya today, we see that we are at a point in which the people have risen up against the pressures, against the negativities of neoliberalism and of capitalism in general. We see that the people have been experiencing massive unemployment. There's been massive poverty. The poverty rate has continuously gone up. Inequality has continuously gone up. People cannot access food. People cannot access healthcare. People cannot access decent housing, clean water and electricity, etc. And that's why there's been a series of protests that have been ongoing in Kenya against the system. People just want to live a dignified life. So having looked at this local situation, and of course looking at the international situation, what do we think we can learn from the experiences of Amílcar Cabral and his organization in their struggle to better the material conditions of Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, of the African people generally? What do we see? Because we're here, we're organizing, we're trying to achieve, a better living condition for all the people in Kenya and in Africa today. And, that's similar to what was going on in the struggle during the time that Cabral was active. So what do we see? What can we learn from that? What is the relevance of Cabral's struggle in our struggle today?
Well, I think that the major thing is for people to understand the need for analysis. And that's where we go to revolutionary ideas. An analysis of revolutionary ideology takes us beyond, again, what we're against. Because the people are growing in their understanding of what they're against. People are even using words like neocolonialism in the streets now. And words like that in the social media. They're looking at the IMF and world forces So they're getting to understand that their struggle is not just local, but it has international dimensions. They're learning, certainly, how to rebel, how to take on the government. They're learning that there's more of them than there are of the forces that are against them in terms of the elite class within the society. Now, there has to be a next level of analysis. What are the forces' intentions? What are the classes? What are the groups? What are their dimensions? And what are their consciousness? And when I talk about consciousness, we know, those of us who are on the left, we know the power of the masses. We know the power of the workers. We know the power because they produce everything that is produced. Even for the forces that are from outside that are dominating our economy, the people are still the ones who produce. If they can shut down any operation in the country, but they have to also not only rebel against economics, but they also have to understand their power. And that takes conscious understanding. That means you have to analyze your power. You have to know your power. And it can't be, again, organized just for against one thing, like the finance bill, or even just the government itself. But it has to be organized in a way that it understands what is final victory. What does final victory look like? And this is what Cabral was clear on, and what we just talked about in his level of understanding of organization, is you have to know what you're fighting for. When Cabral first came back and took a job in Guinea-Bissau, he was an agronomist. So he went around advising farmers and things, and studying farming in different places all over Guinea-Bissau. And while he was doing that, he started analyzing every ethnic group and how they saw themselves, the composition of those groups, understanding their own history, understanding that some ethnic groups were used to having more equality between women and men. Some were more lateral, and some were more hierarchical, that had some beginnings of class in their societies. So he had to study all of that and see how you can create a unity around that with a set of ideas, with making people understand what is the common enemy. So beginning to bring those forces together in a political organization with a clear ideology. This is what we can learn from that experience, the experience of Cabral and the PAIGC, because it's important to understand that even though the imperialists were able to assassinate Cabral in 1973, the forces went on and completed the liberation of Guinea-Bissau in that same year, a few months after he was assassinated in January 20th. They were able to continue the struggle and win it because the ideas were shared. It wasn't just about Cabral. It was about the people's understanding of where they wanted to get to. So you have in these struggles that are taking place in Nigeria, the struggles that are taking place in here, the struggles that are taking place in the Sahel. We have to understand them in terms of how well we can organize and how well we can convey ideas and turn our rebellion into a revolutionary process. Because revolution is a process. Rebellion, we can get mad and upset about anything, and it will, the contradictions in capitalism will always fuel rebellion because they have no interest in the masses, and they will always push the masses to the point that they are going to at least throw a rock or something, scream loud, whatever they can do, they're going to do something. How do you harness that? How do you connect your struggle to the historical realities of the country? How do you make clear of where you want to take the country to? This is only going to happen if you understand revolutionary ideology, revolutionary organization, because that's what brings revolutionary consciousness. People's organization around ideas and actual action. Organized action. That's what makes the struggle permanent and advances it much faster rate.
Yes, organized action. Be in an organization. You must be in an organization to achieve meaningful change. Couldn't be said better, couldn't have been put in a more clear way. As always, thank you very much, Comrade Sobukwe of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We're always glad to have you in the Liberating Minds podcast. We're always glad to have these discussions. And our viewers, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you're yet to like this video, please hit the like button. You should also subscribe so that you get notifications every time that an episode of this podcast goes up. Always a pleasure. My name is Makanga. I'm a member of Revolutionary Socialist Link, which is a party of liberation based here in Kenya. Thank you very much. We are definitely going to have even more conversations as regards this. We are going also to have a commemoration of Amílcar Cabral this September the 12th, and we shall, of course, be sharing more details about this.